You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cricket Podcast for another Cricket World Cup episode. I'm Jack Hope. I'm joined today by Dan Weston. Dan, how are you doing?
Mate, I am all good. Yeah, been working on some stuff for the 100 in preparation for the tournament and the wildcard draft. And yeah, really enjoying that. So yeah, all good.
Great. On this episode, we've got quite a lot to catch up on. Max's wedding got in the way of our group stage coverage a little bit. So I think the last show we did was on Friday. I'll run through the games in a moment, but before we do, just a reminder that this show is sponsored by Manscaped. Use the code CricketPod for 20% off, plus free shipping with our partners over there. And if you are in the market for any cricket equipment, head to Serious Cricket. You can find the affiliate link for them in the show notes. Dan, we have quite a lot to get through. I'm going to skim through all the games quickly. I think we'll talk mainly about England's qualification here, maybe a little bit about Pakistan going out, and maybe a little bit about New Zealand as well before previewing the Super 8s. So we'll have to be brief with any points we want to make. We're going all the way back to Friday when a rain-off between the United States and Ireland sent Pakistan crashing out of the Cricket World Cup and the United States through. Then on Saturday, we saw South Africa complete a clean sweep of the group by beating Nepal by 1 run as they won another low-scoring thriller. They're very much their modus operandi for this tournament. New Zealand finally turned up, but it was a little bit too late as they rolled Uganda for 40, winning that one by 9 wickets. India v Canada, that was another rain-off. Then we got to one of the big ones from an England point of view. They had to beat Namibia. There was a lot of rain about. There was a lot of anxiety for most of the team. Jofra Archer apparently was asleep in the dressing room, so he was feeling pretty cool, calm and collected. In the event, England notched up 122 in their 10 overs, which is a pretty good score considering the opposition. And Namibia, although they gave it a little bit of a go, weren't able to properly threaten England there. That meant that Scotland had to beat Australia on Sunday night or Sunday morning, UK time. It didn't start too well, lost a wicket early, found it hard to get Ashton Agar away, but then things started to build. They got a total of 180 for 5. Brandon McMullen, 60 off 34, the star man for the Scots. And it looked like they were going to upset the apple cart. Early wickets for the Australians put them in a real hole. But Marcus Stoinis and Travis Head eventually managed to get going. And ultimately, they got home with a degree of comfort, with a couple of balls to spare, which meant that Scotland, despite playing some excellent cricket this World Cup, went out in the first round. Then we have Pakistan swan song. Won't dwell on that very much, but they did manage to beat Ireland. Bangladesh beat Nepal. Sri Lanka smashed the Netherlands to send the Netherlands home. And Papua New Guinea were bowled out for 78. Oh, there's one more game. It's always one more game. West Indies, 218. Afghanistan, 114. To do it in the American scoring style. Dan, I've managed to get through, I think, all the games there in about a minute and a half. Let's talk England. In fact, let's talk Scotland first. It feels quite cruel for Scotland to be going home at this stage in the tournament. Like, I feel from all the cricket I've seen that the Scots potentially actually are in the best 8 teams in this tournament, and we're a little bit unlucky with a rain-off in one of their games, and I don't know if they collapsed against Australia, but the Australians certainly got going. They probably were in control of there, and they were also unlucky that they were in a group with Australia and England, who are two of the more competent sides, I thought. Scotland unlucky, or is this about right?
No, I think Scotland are extremely unlucky. I think if you're looking at the outcomes that you would have predicted before the tournament, this is probably like in the upper 1 percentile of their best outcomes, basically. And I feel pretty sorry for them. They couldn't have really done much more than they did against Australia. McMullen is a talent. I like him. I've been watching him for a while. He actually doesn't qualify as a domestic player in England yet, even though he plays for Scotland. So that's probably why he hasn't got a county deal right now. But overall, they were really. It was really, really good to see. Really, really positive. They probably were unlucky not to get more out of the game against England, and overall, yeah, as you say, Jack, very, very harsh on Scotland to be next to. They're definitely one of the better 8 teams in the tournament in the group stages, regardless of the results.
Yeah, so they're going to head off. Seen some calls for people saying that they should be granted full membership status. It feels like we've seen them play quite well at a few T20 World Cups, especially recently, and they were maybe a little bit unlucky not to make the 50 over World Cup. I think did they have a shootout game against the Netherlands, and the winner would have gone through, and they lost that one. Where do you think Scottish cricket is as a whole, as far as you know, anyway?
Okay, so the structure probably needs a little bit more in terms of the actual kind of domestic matches and domestic leagues. Probably also need a stadium with a roof at some point, because otherwise they're going to get a lot of rain-offs. The Scottish T10, I'm hearing mixed things about whether what's going to happen with that this summer. I think that would be quite useful in terms of giving if it happened as it was originally slated to happen, would give the domestic players a nice platform against some better players in franchise cricket, which they probably don't have that much exposure to. So I think all those things are beneficial, and I think you can see this with Scotland. I think you can see it with some other teams as well. That this exposure against better opposition will only improve them over the long term. It might not yield short-term results, but I think we need to still embrace this and to continue with this process of opening up cricket to the world, really.
I think it's been a fantastic group stage, this tournament. I think there'll be people at the ICC and at TV companies who are very sad that Pakistan have been knocked out, and are maybe a little bit sad that New Zealand and Sri Lanka have gone as well. But that is sport. I think the games, by and large, have been really watchable, and the fact that Scotland have come so close to knocking out the current holders of the trophy is I think one, a vindication of going to 20 teams and having a group stage this style rather than that weird pre-qualifying round where they got rid of as many of the so-called small teams as possible. But two, it really does show how close some of these teams are to the so-called bigger nations. I think it's incredibly harsh that Scotland have to go home with a winning record, a positive net run rate, and an unfortunate rain-off under their belt. I'd like to have seen more of them later in the tournament. It is, Dan, it's England who make it through. They took the long way round to pull this off. What are your views on England across the tournament so far? I mean, they've obviously demolished Oman and Namibia. We're in a real dogfight with Scotland and lost convincingly to Australia. It's maybe like a 6 out of 10 so far.
I think that'd be generous, mate. You've got we spoke about last week the generosity of the notional DLS target against Scotland that didn't actually need to happen because of the rain. The fact they didn't take a wicket in 10 overs against Scotland is a real red flag. Yes, they beat Oman easily, but I mean, like, look at the gulf in quality between the two teams. That was always expected. England, you could have literally put out a journeyman blast 11 and it would have beaten Oman. Like, that's no problem at all with that. Namibia was an interesting one because they got kind of what I would say is a middling total in terms of a T10 context. But I think it was a middling total against a team that really doesn't have that many hitters apart from David Visa. And so that middling total became a very, very good total against that specific opposition. You do that against the West Indies, good luck with that. You do that against India or Australia, good luck with that.
Yeah, I know Namibia weren't ever going to win as well, or it was really unlikely they were going to win. But I did wonder whether they'd maybe been better off using Visa. Well, they did use Visa at 3, and obviously there was the retirement. But Smith and Erasmus are the two other guys who probably have, that 1 in 50 innings that could have really put England under pressure in the locker. I'm not sure Van Lingen or Davin did, and by the time they're both out, Erasmus and Smith don't have any time to play that miracle innings, or even have the opportunity to play that miracle innings. So I thought Namibia maybe got that slightly wrong.
An evolution.
Interesting.
They'll learn from, hopefully. And but the thing is that David Visa's played a lot of T10. He's the only one in that group who really has. He was there when I was there, and he. Maybe, I don't know if he gave them the input, but they probably in their coaching staff didn't have that much insight or experience of that 10 over format. And so they probably went a little bit too conventional in that situation.
Yeah, I think that's quite possible. And one of the other things that stood out last week, we did an episode of Strike Rate, which is the other podcast Anne and I do on cricket analytics, and we were looking at players that perform well against weaker oppositions. Harry Brook was one of the players who does much better against bowlers who are not elite World Cup quality. He gets 47 off 20, wins man of the match. So it was interesting to see one of the things we were talking about literally come true. 5 days after the conversation. From an England point of view, I noticed as well that they dropped Phil Salt, bringing Sam Curran back into the team.
They dropped Jacks, not Phil Salt.
Yeah, sorry. The two of them in my head are the same player, even though that they're not. They're very much not the same player. I thought that was quite an interesting call. Do you think that was because of the opposition they were playing against, or do you think England are maybe having second thoughts about their batting order overall?
I think that they were nuts, to be honest with you. I'd have Jacks easily above Bairstow right now for England. I'd have Jacks above some of the spin all-rounders, and I don't understand why you wouldn't want Will Jacks against an associate team in a shortened match. I don't know. Are they scared to drop Bairstow? I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it really stood out to me. I thought it was I can fully, if you're a hardcore England fan and you're saying, well, Will Jacks, he got 6 off 5 in the game that they had to smash him hard in, and he went for 22 against Australia in the Overy Bowl. Like, sure, I understand that, but like, if you're picking Will Jacks, that kind of performance is priced in the same way 100 off 30 is priced in, or like that the demolition job against who's it, Gujarat in the IPL is things he can do. Like there's not that many guys in that lineup who can do it. And the other thing that surprised me about that decision specifically, a lot has been made of England having all these right-handers in their top order. Will Jacks is kind of a bit of a false left-hander in that his numbers are better against the ball spinning away from him than into him. So he actually gives them a little bit of coverage against them getting spammed, if you like, by left-arm spin. Now, I know Namibia maybe aren't the team that this is most relevant for.
They bowled Erasmus 2 overs in a row against 2 right-handers, which again made no sense at all. Yeah.
So there's maybe for this specific game that point doesn't make sense, but if England are thinking about making this change in the longer term and picking the team that they did here, I'm a little bit dubious as to whether it improves them even from a matchup point of view. Now, I know Sam Curran is left-handed, and potentially you could send him up the order as some kind of floating hitter. But even if that is your plan, I'd still rather do it with Will Jacks, factoring in that he does give you that balance that maybe England are lacking.
Why don't you pick both of them?
Well, yeah, you know what? Why not? Like it's actually possible to do that. It is possible to do that. They'll be in a group then, and we'll have a quick look forward to the Super 8s with South Africa, the USA, and West Indies. We'll talk about a couple of them a little bit later in the show, I think. is that a tough ask for this England team? I mean, like it's a bit of a weird group, isn't it? You've got the hosts playing quite well. South Africa really haven't hit their stride, but haven't lost. USA, probably everyone's going to beat them. So net run rate could be a big factor in who goes through here. Where do you see England in terms of progressing as a unit through the tournament?
Well, this is actually something that I wanted to raise, and the volatility of knockout, well, semi-knockout cricket, a short group stage, basically. So I think with this group, there's real scope for 3 teams to go 2-1, and USA to go 0-3. And then we're looking at net run rate. So net run rate is going to be a critical divider of these teams even before I can tell you that right now before that Super 8 even starts. Now, yeah, that's a big consideration. You don't want to lose by too much, and if you're winning in a match comfortably, you want to nail that advantage home and screw your opposition's run rate at the same time. I think what we have in this group is 3 teams that are kind of probably between 50-50 and 60-40 against each other, and one team that everyone would be expected to beat comfortably. Now, that's going to probably lead to 2-1 3 times and a 0-3. Or that's like probably the most likely outcome, at least. So, yeah, it's going to be a lot of variance, a lot of volatility, and I think this is where you talk about England's chances in this Super 8s, and it's going to come down to probably some fine margins and a bit of variance.
Should be quite watchable. It's a really accelerated group stage, isn't it? The first game is today. The last game's on Sunday, and then it's
not going to be setting my alarm for 1:30 in the morning. That's for sure.
Well, what's the game? It's West Indies, isn't it?
A really good game as well. I am not setting my alarm for that.
Yeah, maybe I will. I think where is it? Beausejour. That's the Darren Sammy ground, isn't it? In not Sri Lanka. What we're talking about, St. Lucia. Same initials.
Yeah, I think it means nice stay in French.
Does it?
Yeah, Beausejour. Yeah.
We had a couple of super chats in from Sudeep. One just saying America, and the other saying who has been the best batsman in this World Cup. So to round off part 2, our serious cricket, serious good batter of the first round, who would you say has been the star?
Oh mate, that's a tough question. I don't think it's been a batters tournament. No. If you're looking at the run charts, Bars and Paran are leading with 3 runs between them, exactly the same strike rate. Stoinis is leading it from kind of a strike rate perspective for anyone decent. I'll tell you what, I'm going to give it to Brandon McMullen as an overseas as a associate player. 140 runs at 70, 250s, strike rate of over 170. I think that's a real breakthrough tournament for him.
Yeah, I think he's been excellent. I maybe have gone. I know Gurbaz got his runs against probably weaker players, but he got runs against New Zealand, didn't he? And that's basically the game. Yeah. That's the game that gets Afghanistan through to the next round. So I'd maybe go for Gurbaz in terms of pure impact. Then we're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to come back and I guess we'll have a laugh about Pakistan.
You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Cricket Podcast, where we're talking the T20 World Cup Group Stage. Well, it's all wrapped up, hasn't it, Dan? There's nothing really. Well, we're not mid stage anymore. We're mid tournament. We're at that weird break. It's obviously slightly old news now, but Pakistan were one of, if not the major casualty from the first round of games. thanks to a rain-off. Well, maybe not really thanks to a rain-off. Thanks to the fact that they lost to USA. Let's be honest here.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the rain-off did seal the deal. And subsequently, there's been a huge meltdown in Pakistani cricket. There's a video of Haris Rauf trying to fight a fan that came out last night. Some quotes from Gary Kirsten that may or may not have been actually said by Gary Kirsten along the lines of, well, I'll just read out what he is alleged to have said. There's no unity in Pakistan's team. They call it a team, but it isn't a team. They aren't supporting each other. Everyone is separated left and right. I've worked with many teams, but I've never seen such a situation. If we're to compete in the world, we have to improve our fitness and skills and be united. We are way behind in terms of fitness. Only the players who want to improve on their fitness will remain in the team. I will stress, like, Gary Kirsten didn't say this in a press conference. This is apparently something that happened behind closed doors, but apparently they are also his general thoughts on Pakistan. Dan, we do want to do a deep dive on this on Strike Rate, and that's going to be our next show. So we don't want to tip our cards too heavily, but we need to discuss the fact that Pakistan are out the World Cup. Dismal tournament for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can give a soup song of the flavour for
yes.
talk about on Strike Rate. But whether Kirsten said this or not is kind of actually irrelevant, because I think whatever the quote, whoever said this quote is pretty much spot on, right? I mean, like, there's not really a great deal that you can argue with. You talk about team unity, where they picked two guys who retired from international cricket, but just so conveniently unretired just before the World Cup started. And I think that there's a lot of criticism from these current players against other current players on TV and all this sort of stuff, and it just kind of inevitably will create a pretty toxic environment that can't be conducive to playing at a high level. But by the same token, if Gary Kirsten did say this, I think the biggest surprise is that he didn't know this before he started. I chatted to teams a lot about, like, working with them and stuff. And the first thing I do is now, especially after I had one experience where I learned this very quickly, is in terms of, like, getting my ideas through. Is you actually want to do your due diligence on who you're working for, and I speak to people in cricket a lot, and one of the first things I say, if you're going to take a job with, like, the Pakistan national team, and there's probably a few other teams that you throw that into as well, make sure you got a long contract and make sure you get paid up if they sack you after 2 weeks. Like this is
they're the Chelsea of international cricket.
I think that's a bit
harsh on Chelsea.
Harsh on Chelsea, yeah. Watford, I don't know.
Yeah,
just a lot. But in all seriousness, like that is a major issue in terms of the fact that, one, you've got those guys coming back in from the cold. You've got I think a big problem in terms of just this critical nature of Pakistan supporters and Pakistan media, and it doesn't help. Then you've also got some really weird quotes from Babar Azam saying, like, he can't do it all on his own or something like that. And like, that was after he scored a 32 of 34 balls. It's kind of like actually put a bit of pressure on people. and then you look at him and Rizwan, and I think we would all agree, and I think we spoke about this before in Strike Rate, is that you can't have them in the same team. It's as simple as that. Like, you're putting way too much pressure on the rest of the team. It cannot be a coincidence that a player like Azam Khan, who as we spoke about on Strike Rate last week, has a really good record actually against better bowlers around the world. He can't get a run in this Pakistan. Yeah, when he plays for Pakistan, he really struggles. But there's no logical understanding as to why that's the case. And I have to think that now that's because he's coming in and he's being tasked with hitting from ball one. That's a super volatile role, and they're kind of setting him up to fail a little bit. Rizwan and Babar, one of them's got to go. But the problem is, I think that the coach will end up going, not necessarily Kirsten, but whoever the coach will be, will go before one of them goes, because like there's just like this power that the whoever is ultimately in charge of Pakistan cricket and makes sure that these guys play, or whether that's the players themselves, I don't know. But you're not going to see change, put it that way, I don't think. They chop and change their team a lot. There's a lot of players who come in, come out. You've got when we looked at strike rate last week about performance against better bowlers. 5 of the 8 guys that we looked at from Pakistan had a strike rate difference of over 12 worse against better bowlers than they did overall. And when you look at that, actually that's probably like 20 plus against the worst bowlers in isolation. So they're basically bullying mediocre bowlers domestically and then struggling with the step up to international cricket. And I think it's important also to reiterate that, particularly Rawalpindi, Pakistan Super League is played on roads a lot of the time. Both Rizwan and Bawa have really bad numbers against the better bowlers compared to their overall numbers. Every single player of the 8 that we looked at in that sample size have over almost 2% plus dots against better bowlers. Rizwan, Iftikhar, Fakhar Zaman, over 4.5%. Only Azam Khan has a positive boundary percentage difference against better bowlers. So actually, if you knew all this in advance, that probably would have been a real red flag for the selectors. But I don't suppose for 1 minute that they did know this in advance, and I'm not supposed for 1 minute that they actually really would have worried about it anyway, because it seems like they pick everything on vibes rather than any concrete analysis.
They've probably only been selected for about 2 weeks before the tournament as well. So even if they wanted to do that research, they didn't have time to get it done.
Is it Wahab Riaz, the selector?
He was
at one point. I don't know if he still is, but I mean, like, what qualifies him to be a selector? He's just finishing his playing career. Like, why would you do that? I don't understand. Like, actually, if there's one country, and I'll put myself out there, and I don't mind a bit of self-promotion. If there's one country in world cricket that needs an independent voice, an independent analysis, someone who's got no preconceived bias about any player, can come in and be super objective about the whole talent pool, the structure of the country's cricket and selection, it's Pakistan. Then they urgently need this.
Yeah. Shocking tournament for them. And they deserve to be going home, to be honest. It's not even like they smashed Canada and Ireland as well. I mean, that's the other thing. The games they did win, they made pretty hard work of beating Canada, and that there's a pretty big difference in ability between those two teams. And
they almost lost to Ireland, chasing at 110.
Yeah, they needed 106 for Ireland, and they won it 7 down with 7 balls to spare. So lots to think about there. Dan, there's a couple of surprise teams that went through to the next round. Afghanistan and Bangladesh. We'll get to them in a moment, but they get through at the expense of New Zealand and Sri Lanka. I want to talk about those two teams for a second. Let's start with Sri Lanka. They were some people's dark horse for this tournament. Roth would describe them as the kind of engine of a Ferrari, but the chassis of a Nissan Micra or something like that, with the difference between their batting and their bowling. They only won 1 game.
Bits of laughter. That is so good.
It's disappointing for Sri Lanka, or it is a team that's kind of growing at the moment, and maybe there are some green shoots there.
Look, if you're looking at their bowling, it's better than some of the teams that have qualified for sure. I still don't think that they quite know their best team combinations. I still think that there's guys like Shanaka and Angelo Matthews now, who they probably need to move on from a little bit. Could they have picked Rajapaksa as someone who's quite a lot different in terms of intent and power to their actual batters? I think was it you who mentioned to me about, like, I think 5 of their guys strike like under 120, and their batters,
yes, it might have been, yeah,
and that's a major issue, and that is again a structural problem that needs to be addressed, because the only reason why people strike at those rates is because, one, they either have a lack of power, or two, they have a lack of intent, and if they have a lack of intent or fear, then that comes from how they're coached growing up.
yeah.
And at professional level, they're encouraged to take risk-averse options rather than positive options, and so they've got to address that. If they could address their batting, then I think they could have really caused a shock and maybe even got down to the last 4, because their bowling is really, really good. They're actually a very similar profile team in terms of like the dynamics and the batting versus bowling issues. So Afghanistan really in a big game is go buzz or bust, and actually, even though Rashid Khan is a world-class player and the best spinner in the world probably in T20, Gabbal's their most important player, because without him, they're not getting anything like a pass score or better.
Yeah, so they'll be heading home. I mean, like, we always thought, kind of before the tournament, that we thought they were better than Bangladesh, but they would have that game v Bangladesh was likely to be the knockout game, because Sri Lanka, they're not Sri Lanka, South Africa probably substantially better than everyone else in that group,
yes.
And they win their 4 games by narrow margins. It was by no means like an exercise in brilliance by South Africa, but they did win all their games. And then on the day, Bangladesh were able to beat Sri Lanka in what was quite a close match, I think, wasn't it? Yeah, they won it by 2 wickets with 6 balls to spare, and that's the margin. So it will be, I'm sure, a disappointing campaign if you're a Sri Lankan fan, but you're really only within 2 good balls of the next round there. So I don't know. Also, not the world's biggest disaster. I feel like New Zealand, it actually was a bit of a disaster this World Cup. They finished with an even record. They finished with a positive net run rate, but that's basically because they demolished Uganda and Papua New Guinea, who between them only managed 118 runs against the Kiwis. Beaten by West Indies pretty comfortably and hammered by Afghanistan. It feels like an end of an era for New Zealand.
It absolutely does. And I think that this has been a team for a good decade at least that has overperformed at international tournaments. And I think now we're seeing this reversion back to that not being the case, probably because I think this is one tournament too many for a lot of their players. I would certainly say that for Williamson. And I don't know if you've seen Jack overnight. There's been an announcement that he's rejected a central contract. So
I haven't seen that, but yeah, I'm not.
Ferguson have both done so apparently, according to Cricket Info that I read this morning. So probably an end of an era. But I mean, like, look, if we're being objective about it, Kane Williamson would have to be Dhoni ×2 as a captain to merit a place in this team right now. Before the World Cup too. I mean, like, his numbers are really, over the last 2 years, are not good. I think that's putting it very kindly.
Yeah, they're awful.
He's not getting picked for any other reason apart from the fact that he's Kane Williamson. Yeah, that's a really key point in terms of how cricket is quite backward in making big calls about big name players and legacy players, kind of thing, and they almost let the player decide, whereas football is more proactive in that situation. And I think it's another example of how behind the times cricket is really when it comes to selection and squad planning.
Yeah, I think Williamson in particular, I think it's mystifying to me how he's still, or how he was still, an international T20 captain, and how he's got contracts in any league in the world, to be honest.
Well, apparently, one of the reasons given for his rejection of a central contract was that he's got an opportunity in an overseas league. So someone still thinks that he can do that.
In the last 3 years, he's struck 103 in domestic T20 tournaments, and this is from 465 balls. So this isn't like that's a lot of balls where he's not really going anywhere. He's in the mix with basically bowlers, DJ Bravo, Akil Hussain, Joe Denley, actually, down there. It's Joshua Da Silva from the West Indies. Like, these are not high quality T20 players that strike at 103. They're generally speaking pretty bad. And I would have Williamson in the bad category. I do think, like you say, it was a tournament too far for quite a few of these players.
I'll be amazed if he can deal in the mega auction. Absolutely amazed.
What I will say though is it was a really good era. If it is the end for this Kiwi side, like what they accomplished was pretty incredible. Like multiple knockout games, finals. Obviously, on the Test side, they'd win the World Test Championship. That's really good going for a nation where, as my friend Joel likes to say, who is from New Zealand, there are the same number of people playing cricket as there are in Somerset in the UK. Like, they're doing all right.
The World Cup, though, to be fair.
Well, yeah, maybe this time, but it has over, I don't know what, 8 years, Dan. It's a good legacy that they'll leave.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. No doubt about that.
Cool. So just to take a really, really quick look, we talked about Group 2 earlier. At Group 1 for the Super 8s, that's Afghanistan, Australia, Bangladesh, and India. We had a comment from Andy earlier who says, "Isn't it stupid if we want to see India in the finals to seed them with Australia in the group stage?" I think, as it happens, Australia and India will be pretty happy that Afghanistan and Bangladesh are the two teams that get through. Or do you think there could be some upsets in Group 1?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you've got two very obvious qualification teams, basically. So that, we spoke about the England group being like 3 teams on 2-1 and 1 team on 0-3 potentially. I think here we have 1 team of 3-0, 1 team 2-1, 1 team 1-2, and 1 team 0-3.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most likely outcome. I mean, like, obviously, Australia play India. I think that it's their final game of the Super 8 stage. So there's the potential that becomes a quarterfinal for one of those sides, if that makes sense. If they do slip up against Bangladesh or Afghanistan and they need to pick up a win there. But I'm looking at the Google win predictor, which I'm pretty sure is just pulled through from the Betfair market. That's giving it 84% to Australia, which is
that it? I thought it would be like 90.
Well, only 84%. Sorry, Dan. The Afghanistan, the one for Afghanistan, India. Let me just find that quickly to kind of give an indication of the differences in ability. India 79% to beat Afghanistan. So uphill tasks for the small nations there. We'll probably see India go through. Dan, I'm going to ask you one final question. I think we'll be back on Friday as well for people who are interested to do a mid Super 8s update show. Who's going to win the World Cup?
Oh, I never like these because of the variance of knockout cricket. But I am going to delight our Indian audience and saying I'm sticking with the guys from India.
I'm probably still with India. I picked India as Dan Bones goes off there. I picked India before the tournament. I'm still not. I still think they're quite beatable, but I think all the teams are pretty beatable, and they're maybe the least beatable, if that
Agree. That's a very fair
sentence makes sense. Got Jinx in the chat says West Indies will win. That would be nice. I think West Indies win the World Cup at home would probably be the romantic choice. But I think Head says in India. Dan, we're going to wrap up there. Thanks very much for joining. Anything you want to plug before we close the stream?
Well, as Jack mentioned earlier, we've got the other podcast, Strike Rate, the Cricket Analytics podcast. You can catch that on all good podcast providers and probably some bad ones too. And if you want to read more about strategy, you can follow me on SA Advantage on Twitter or X and danweston.substack.com. And yeah, thanks, Jack. It's been really, really good to be here.
Cool. See you soon.